The birth of college basketball, 1891 to 1904. In the great chill of December 1891, a humble bond of the gym at the YMCA training school in Springfield, Massachusetts would unknowingly host a defining moment in sports history. James Naismith, a mild-mannered Canadian physical education instructor, stared at 18 restless young men. It was heart-stoppingly clear that extended indoor sessions had proven too much for their boisterous energy. Tasked with inventing a new game that maintained discipline but curtailed injuries, Naismith drew upon childhood memories of Duck on a Rock and blended elements from soccer, football, and gymnastics. Using a soccer ball and ending up with 2 peach baskets for goals, thanks to the janitor's ingenuity, he nailed the baskets 10 feet high on the balcony, designed 13 simple rules, and tossed the ball up for the first tip-off on December 21, 1891. But calm control wasn't on the agenda. Bruises, black eyes, and even a concussion resulted. Realizing the physicality veered too far into football, his 13 rules, neatly typed by a secretary and thumbtacked to the wall, set boundaries. No dribbling, no fist hits, and fouls for tripping or holding, with disqualification for repeated offenses. Games would span 2 15-minute halves with a 5-minute rest, concise by today's standards, yet perfectly balanced for an indoor workout. Barely weeks after that chilly evening, the game was printed in the school's publication and spread through the YMCA network like wildfire. Instructors took it to YMCAs across Boston, New York, and even internationally to Bombay and Shanghai, all under the banner of a clean, safer alternative to rougher outdoor sports. By early 1892, the YMCA's social capital was in full display. Within months, the game reached women's colleges like Smith, thanks to educators like Senda Berenson, who adapted rules to limit physical contact respectfully. By 1893, the game was ready for a bigger stage, college courts. On February 7th, Vanderbilt University took on the local YMCA in Nashville, defeating them 9-6 in what many consider the first college team contest. A few months later, on April 8th, Geneva College beat New Brighton YMCA 3-0 in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, in a match organized by physical education pioneer Charles Bemis, a colleague of Naismith's at the YMCA, who helped introduce basketball to higher education. Geneva's involvement is partly noteworthy. Naismith's own grandson singled out Geneva as the birthplace of college basketball. These early games featured 9 players per side, mirroring the size of Naismith's class and allowing more participants in a time before specialization. The team set up 3 guards, 3 forwards, 3 centers, reflected logistical and rule-based practicality, though it looks chaotic compared to today's 5-on-5 format. The evolution toward 5-on-5 came in January 1896 when the University of Chicago's coach Amos Alonzo Stagg and Iowa's Henry Kallenberg organized a new style match in Iowa City. With a crowd of around 500 in Close Hall, the first collegiate 5-on-5 game played under refined rules ended in a 15-12 victory for Chicago. Kallenberg, a Springfield graduate, and Stagg aimed to standardize the format, and their success established the blueprint for modern basketball. From that experimental half-court in Iowa City, basketball radiated across college campuses. By 1900, institutions from coast to coast had adopted it. Soon thereafter, universities formed a collegiate basketball rule committee, which merged into the NCAA's precursors by 1909, signaling the birth of formal governance. Simultaneously, gear evolved. Steel hoops replaced peach baskets, bottomless nets allowed continuous play, and dedicated backboards appeared by the mid-1890s. All this innovation, rules, equipment, structure grew out of a simple wintertime need. Dr. Naismith's peach basket game matured rapidly, propelled by fervent YMCA advocacy and the ambition of college athletics. Those formative years laid the groundwork for an American tradition, a sport built for students, defined by teamwork and finesse, which would one day captivate tens of millions each spring. The formation era, 1904 to 1937. In the summer of 1904, amid the fanfare of the St. Louis World's Fair and the Third Modern Olympics, basketball quietly staged its first college-only tournament. Surprised, though treated as a demonstration sport, it revealed the contours of something far bigger than a fad and infiltration.
3 college teams, Hiram College of Ohio, Wheaton College of Illinois, and Latter-day Saints University, now BYU, met on makeshift courts laid out in the shadow of Olympic stadiums.
Hiram emerged victorious, defeating Wheaton 23-20 and earning the honor of intercollegiate world champions. It was a modest affair. No mascots, no packed stands, and probably no highlight reels, but in retrospect, it read like a teaser trailer for the explosive rise of college basketball. It was the Amateur Athletic Union, not the NCAA, that dominated national basketball at the time. Founded in 1888, the AAU hosted national tournaments open to all amateur teams, clubs, YMCAs, and colleges. And interestingly, college teams sometimes held their own. Utah University claimed the AAU national title in 1916, NYU in 1920, Butler in 1924, and Washburn in 1925. 9 years after that first collegiate court clash, in March 1908, the University of Chicago arranged a 2-game championship series against Penn 1, match in Philadelphia, the other in Bartlett, Illinois. Chicago swept both games to claim supremacy, setting the tone for the future of intercollegiate rivalry. Still, for many years, AAU events remained the premier stage for basketball. Indeed, in the 1904 Olympic tournament,
the Buffalo German YMCA team dominated the field and convincingly claimed the demonstration event.
these barnstorming teams traveled widely and popularized the game, but college basketball yearned for its own platform. That moment arrived in March 1922, when Indianapolis hosted the first ever National Intercollegiate Basketball Tournament, a postseason event entirely for college teams. 6 champions of regional leagues and conferences, Wabash College, Indiana, Kalamazoo, Michigan, Grove City, Pennsylvania, Mercer, Georgia, Illinois Wesleyan, and Idaho converged to play in a bracketed contest. Wabash, coached by Pete Vaughn and known as the Third Wonder 5, triumphed over Kalamazoo 43-23 and claimed a national title. Though few pay attention to those bracket sheets today, this event marked the first time college teams competed in a unified postseason series, planting a seed that would grow into the NCAA tournament. Yet the landscape still included the AAU's might alongside baseball, football, and fledgling basketball programs. College teams would grind through regional matchups and AAU fixtures, hoping to test themselves against non-collegiate competition. Meanwhile, athletics departments were figuring out how to balance tuition funding, YMCA affiliations, and growing student interest. At smaller institutions, especially those with club teams and unofficial squads, they thrived. Eventually, though, it became clear colleges needed their own governing structure to preserve amateur ideals and build sustainable athletic programs. That evolution reached a milestone in 1937 with the founding of the National Association of Intercollegiate Basketball, NAIB, soon renamed the NAIA, to oversee national championships for small colleges. The NAIB's first tournament that year closed the gap for numerous institutions that lacked access to AAU events and resources to compete in bigger college tournaments.
Offered a national stage just for smaller schools, championed athletes and programs outside major universities.
And though the NRT would soon overtake it in prestige for big school teams, the NAIA still played a crucial role in democratizing college basketball across America. The Tournament Wars, 1938 to 1960. In 1938, the city that never sleeps briefly shifted its attention from Broadway to Hardwood as the Metropolitan Basketball Writers Association inaugurated the first national invitation tournament at Madison Square Garden. Temple University seized the moment, rolling over Colorado 60-36 in front of enthusiastic New York fans. The Owls' victory, complete with Don Shields shooting quirky underhanded free throws, crowned them as, not unofficially, the national champions in a time when the NCAA had yet to make its mark. At that moment, the NIT was the postseason centerpiece, its prestige rivaling and often overshadowing the NCAA tournament's embryonic efforts. What started with 6 teams competing on the Garden floor quickly became the gold standard for elite college basketball. A year later, in 1939, the NCAA finally entered the arena, launching its own tournament. But in those formative years, many top-tier teams opted for the NIT over the NCAA's bracket, for New York Lights and the Garden's grandeur. There was something about hearing your name echo through bleachers rather than play in quieter regional venues. As legendary Princeton guard Bill Bradley once wrote in The New Yorker, winning the NIT often felt national than claiming the NCAA title. Yet the tides began to turn in the late 1940s. The NCAA, seeking broader legitimacy, expanded its reach by moving its East Regionals and Final Four to Madison Square Garden between 1943 and 1948. These moves nudged the NCAA from beacon to rival. The NCAA adopted a more inclusive model, inviting teams from across the country and growing the field beyond the original 8. The shift appeased geography and talent distribution, but also blurred earlier NIT luster. Then, In 1950, an almost mythical event occurred. CCNY, a modest public college, pulled off the only Grand Slam in college basketball history, winning both the NIT and NCAA championships. Under coach Nat Holman, the Beavers upset Bradley in finals 69-61 in the Garden and 59-48 in the NCAA title game,
Creating a moment so it seemed scripted by Hollywood.
In 1951, that same CCNY squad was exposed in a scandal involving point shaving, where players accepted bribes to manipulate scores. Their accomplishments. The fallout went beyond CCNY. Manhattan, NYU, LIU, Toledo, Kentucky, and Bradley were implicated. In New York's marble halls and grim interrogation rooms, District Attorney Frank Hogan unearthed a web of corruption involving over 30 players and countless fixed games. This scandal rocked the nation. Newspapers screamed headlines. NBA careers were ended before they began. CCNY was banned from the Garden and relegated to obscurity. Yet, incredulously, the crisis may have saved college basketball. Colleges across the country, including those affiliated with the NCAA, began tightening rules, instituting investigative rules, and strengthening monitoring. Fans, once disillusioned, were slowly reassured that tournaments would remain fair and unscripted. In a bitter irony, the NIT lost much of its prestige while the NCAA emerged stronger and more credible. Its tournament is now seen as the gold standard for integrity and competitiveness. By the end of the 1950s, college basketball had entered a new era. The NCAA tournament had overtaken the NIT, both in prestige and participation. Schools that once daydreamed of the bright lights in New York were now chasing the national championship via the NCAA's sprawling bracket and fairness first mandate. The legacy of the 30-second point shaving scandal and transformation had reshaped the sport. What began with garden variety competition had evolved into a cultural phenomenon driven by transparency, structure, and a commitment to purity, even if that purity had almost been undone by corruption. Civil rights and conference shifts, 1960s, 1970s. In the charged atmosphere of the 1960s and 1970s, college basketball evolved into more than just a sport. It became a stage for societal change, institutional pride, and political maneuvering. In March 1966, thousands of Americans sat glued to their radios and televisions as the underdog Texas Western Miners faced the powerhouse Kentucky Wildcats in the NCAA championship. Coached by Don Haskins, Texas Western made history, not with a last-second shot, but with its unshakable lineup. 5 black starters facing an all-white Kentucky, a team from a segregated South. They stunned the sporting world with a 72-65 win, defiantly challenging long-held biases about race and ability. Bobby Joe Hill's quick steals and the composure of David Lattin, Orson Artis, and Willie Worsley showed a disciplined, teen-first mentality, a narrative that countered racist stereotypes and inspired a sea change in college recruiting. Up until that moment, many colleges, especially in the South, had resisted integrating their basketball programs, but the floodgates opened as ACC schools, already under pressure from boosters and civil rights advocates, began determinedly actively recruiting talented black players. The ACC, once notorious for its all-white courts, quickly emerged as a leader in integration, driven not only by moral imperatives, but by the simple reality: winning requires the best talent, regardless of skin color. The impact of Texas Western's victory reverberated far beyond that game. It symbolized a crack in the walls of segregation, and college programs scrambled to follow suit. In parallel with its racial awakenings, the NCAA engaged in an often underplayed, subtly power struggle with the Amateur Athletic Union at AAU. Though this conflict would manifest in various arenas, it found one of its most public expressions in the Jack Langer case. In 1969, Yale center Jack Langer, who happened to be Jewish, defied NCAA pressure by playing for Team USA in the Maccabiah Games in Israel. The NCAA, already intent on reasserting dominance over amateur competitions, refused to sanction his participation. Enraged by what they saw as overreach, Yale, backed by other Ivy League presidents, and defended Langer's religious freedom. In January 1970, the NCAA responded with a 2-year probation on all Yale athletics, a draconian move affecting 300 students. Damning public critiques followed, including from U.S. Representative Robert Jimo, who condemned the organization's dictatorial hierarchy.
Though the conflict eventually subsided, it underscored thoughtfully broader tensions between centralized athletic control and institutional sovereignty. Even as these battles unfolded, colleges began consolidating into conferences to make sense of shifting alignments, competition, and institutional identities.
As integration progressed, regional conferences like the ACC, Big Ten, and Southwest Conference began defining themselves not only geographically, but also by shared values and culture centered around race, academics, and the style of play.
Conferences became crucibles of identity. The ACC with its academic prestige and fan fervor, and the Southwest Conference as a bastion of Texas pride, now morphing as integration, open access to new talent.
This coalescence was more than administrative convenience. Conferences offered structured schedules, automated NCAA bids, and intense rivalries that captivated fans and shaped campus climates. The integration era amplified those effects. As schools recruited Black players, integrated rosters became symbols of progress and change within conservative communities.
Conferences were no longer just associations of convenience. They became platforms for social evolution.
The 1960s and 1970s forged an indelible legacy. The Texas Western victory shattered myths. ACC integration proved basketball's moral and competitive power. The Langer case exposed a shifting power dynamic in amateur athletics, and conferences sharpened their identities around competition and institutional pride.
Athletic directors, boosters, and coaches realized to win, diversify, to lead, embrace change.
By the end of the 1970s, college basketball had undergone a significant transformation. The first fully integrated champions were the new normal.
Modern conferences had real identities. The NCAA had sharpened its institutional teeth, and the sport, once a sidelined afterthought, now carried the weight of cultural progression, proof that on the hardwood the game had become a vehicle for history itself.
Expansion and modernization, 1975 to 1990s. Throughout the 1970s and into the 1990s, college basketball underwent such a sweeping transformation that the sport, which was once known in small gymnasiums, became synonymous with a cultural explosion known today as March Madness.
Even if no one admitted it at the time, seeds were being sown for bigger brackets, bigger TV contracts, bigger heroes, and bigger heartbreaks.
In 1975, the NCAA shook the college basketball world by expanding its tournament from a modest 25-team affair to a 32-team bracket. This change wasn't just cosmetic.
For decades, only one team per conference was allowed to enter the tournament, leaving many worthy squads on the sidelines.
That year marked the first time multiple teams from the same conference could dance at Naismith.
With newcomers like Nebraska, USC, and UNLV finally getting their shot at the big dance, cuz it was the moment when mid-majors, Cinderella stories, and conference showdowns began to capture the national imaginations.
Just 4 years later, the tournament ballooned to 40 teams. By 1980, the number of teams had reached 48, then 52, 53, and ultimately 64 by 1985. That final expansion in '85 was seismic. No more buys, no more special treatment. Just 6 straight wins to become national champ. The newly minted 64-team field meant every corner of the country mattered, every conference had relevance, and every February Sunday afternoon became a high-stakes calculation for fans.
Amid all this, the phrase March Madness took hold. While the term was born in Illinois high school tournaments, it found its true home in college basketball during this era.
A watershed moment occurred in 1979 when Magic Johnson's Michigan State team tipped off against Larry Bird's undefeated Indiana State in the national championship.
This game still holds the record Nielsen rating at a staggering 24.1. Magic Larry and the spotlight ignited a frenzy. Office pools, bracket fever, and TV remotes flipped in real time. The transformation was undeniable. The tournament's runaway success came at the expense of the venerable NIT.
Once the premier postseason showcase in New York City's Madison Square Garden, the NIT began with charismatic 16 fields and garden-led glamour.
But as the NCAA expanded its field to include top teams and multiple bids per conference, even still, elite squads opted to bypass the NIT. Definitive. By the mid-1980s, attendance and relevance had shifted. MSG still worked, but the NCAA Big Dance had become the place to be.
And then came dynasties. UCLA, already the standard bearer with 10 titles between 1964 and 1975,
handed the baton to Duke, North Carolina, Kansas, and other blue bloods who flooded national conversation in the 80s and 90s. Duke's rise knew no bounds. Mike Krzyzewski turned Cameron Indoor into a basketball fortress. UNC's Dean Smith molded Tar Heel teams into precision powerhouses. And Kansas reminded everyone that Midwestern grit still counted. The Final Four itself exploded in scale. In the 80s, venues jumped from traditional basketball arenas to NFL-sized stadiums.
By 1996, every Final Four weekend was hosted in massive domed bowl venues, offering spectacle, volume, and tickets by the tens of thousands.
That comes with a cost to intimacy, but the payoff was visibility, reach, and dollars.
It was during this period that college players became college household names. Bird, Johnson, Jordan, Smith, Leitner. Amateurs elevated to star status.
Professional scouts watched, shoe companies signed deals, and for the first time, athletic gear and recruitment coverage felt like tabloid gold. Yet with all the glam came growing pains. Questions were raised about fairness in seeding, parity for small schools, expansion dilution, and the increasing cost of broadcasting rights.
Still, the NCAA rode the wave. By the early 90s, March Madness was memorialized as a national ritual.
Libraries held bracket sheets. Offices went silent. Churches delayed Thursdays or evenings.
It was an unstoppable spectacle.
By the end of the decade, college basketball had remade itself completely. From an 8-team regional game in 1939 to a 64-team media phenomenon that could shut down schools, capture news cycles, elevate legends, and crash office productivity. In the process, it became one of the great American cultural events. A sport for students that outgrew its gyms, carried dreams, fed allegiances, and delivered heartbreak, joy, and legends. All wrapped into 6 knockout rounds.
The media and money era, 1990s through 22.
From the 1990s through the 2010s, college basketball entered a new age defined less by chalkboards and dusty gymnasiums than by broadcast networks, billion-dollar deals, and shifting conference loyalties.
What began as purely regional rivalries transformed into nationally televised spectacles, and power brokers began redrawing the map not for geography, but for money and media reach. At the heart of the metamorphosis lay conference realignment, driven by the money from media rights. The Big Ten, SEC, ACC, Big 12, and Pac-10, soon to become super conferences, began aggressively expanding not just to add teams on the court, but to bring in larger TV markets and richer TV contracts. In the mid-90s, the ACC added Florida State, even as the Big Ten brought Maryland and Rutgers aboard in 2014. By the 2000s, the Big Ten had struck a 6-year, $2.6 billion media deal, then soared to over $7 billion with its 2023 renegotiation across CBS, Fox, and NBC. Adding powerhouses like UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington further expanded its national footprint, proof that conference membership came to be defined less by geography and more by airtime. More televised games meant more exposure, and exposure bred fandom, and fandom attracted revenue. What used to be a modest sprinkling of televised games turned into 24/7 basketball networks, streaming packages, and TV showdowns on weekdays, Sundays, and yes, often in March. Conference tournaments, once considered glorified warm-ups, have become must-watch events, broadcasting in prime time and drawing millions on ESPN. Winning those became as lucrative as making the NCAA tournament itself, offering automatic bids, bragging rights, and commercial windfalls. All of this created an environment where independent schools like Chicago State found themselves left behind. Without conference TV deals, there was no consistent broadcast revenue, few marquee matchups, and limited access to NCAA tournaments. Chicago State floated as an independent from 2022 to 2024, painfully visible in its 13-19 season and 0-0 media footprint. With no conference tournament to play in, no TV revenue to share, and constant scheduling difficulties, independents found themselves in survival mode. Until in 2024, Chicago State finally joined the Northeast Conference as their last hope for stability. This period also saw a sharp decline for the National Invitation Tournament. Once the centerpiece of postseason glory in New York's Madison Square Garden, the NIT lost top-tier teams to the ever-growing NCAA brackets. As major conferences began granting multiple NCAA bids and postseason expansion overtook the NIT, its luster dimmed.
What once had been a stage of champions became a consolation prize, still meaningful but no longer premier.
Want us to dive into the current top 25 college basketball teams and their spot in this media-driven world?
Let us know and don't forget to subscribe so we know you're watching next time. The Pandemic Pause 2020. The spring of 2020 was supposed to be yet another epic ending to a college basketball season. Brackets ready, ticketed dreamers in tow, then within hours the world stopped. On March 12th, the NCAA president and board of governors made the somber, unprecedented decision to cancel both the men's and women's tournaments along with all remaining winter and spring championships, citing the rapidly spreading COVID-19 pandemic that made hosting any of those events impractical and unsafe, do I quote. It was a day that shattered tradition. March Madness, a fixture since 1939, evaporated, an event even NCAA president Mark Emmert never dreamed would not happen. For fans, teams, TV networks, coaches, and bracket makers alike, this cancellation was an emotional gut punch that went far beyond X's and O's. When the decision dropped, millions of bracket-filled hopes disappeared overnight. Conference tournaments were halted mid-game. Even the Big East Creighton vs. St. John's matchup was cut short at halftime.
What followed was a rapid domino effect. Power 5 conference games canceled within hours, smaller schools suspended athletics entirely, and whispers of what this would mean financially.
The NCAA's $600 million distribution to Division I alone plummeted to $225 million, a cut that particularly impacted smaller school budgets, threatening jobs, scholarships, and even the existence of entire sports programs.
Right after the cancellation, the NCAA sprang into action on athlete eligibility.
Recognizing the lost seasons, it extended eligibility relief so that no winter-spring athlete, including basketball players, will lose a year played solely due to the pandemic leave. Effectively, the 2020 season became a freebie, a retroactive redshirt, allowing seniors or injured players the right to return for an extra year. Institutions face complex choices, whether to fund additional scholarships, delay recruitment, or restructure their rosters. The results saw super senior lineups in follow-up seasons, with veteran players continuing to lead teams in the 2021 bubble season. Emotionally, the toll was immense, especially for seniors. Countless athletes, many on the cusp of graduation or NBA selection, lost their final opportunity to perform under the bright lights. One such story is that of teams like Robert Morris, who had clinched conference championships only to be robbed of their NCAA bid, leaving locker rooms silent and coaches bearing some of the worst moments of their careers. For NBA-bound seniors, dreams were delayed or derailed. The extra eligibility gave them choices, but those choices brought new pressures: return for another college season or declare for a strange, pandemic-altered draft. The NCAA and NBA responded with amendments to draft eligibility windows, allowing seniors to test the waters without forfeiting their extra year. With workouts halted and camps canceled, athletes confronted deep disappointment and anxiety. The NCAA extended transfer eligibility and paused the usual redshirt rules, allowing student athletes immediate play even after transferring. In other words, play where you can, when you can. But amid a backdrop of testing protocols, travel restrictions, and campus lockdowns.
None of this was quick. Bubbles, empty arenas, repeated testing, and restrictions defined the following seasons.
But for athletes who had lost their peak year, the extra eligibility relief became a chance at redemption, as Esclanel, players like RJ Davis at UNC, who stayed on to chase records, and Hunter Dickinson at Kansas, whose veteran presence carried teams deep into tournament runs, became poster children for this era's roller coaster journey. The rebuilding and realignment era, 2021-2024. Between 2021 and 2024, college basketball began to rebuild itself. After the long silence during the pandemic, fans finally came back. Arenas were full again. The sound of cheers, band music, and student chants brought the game back to life. For many players and coaches, it felt like they were finally breathing again. College basketball wasn't just a sport, it was a part of everyday life that had been missing. In 2021, Baylor shocked the world by beating undefeated Gonzaga in the NCAA championship game. It wasn't just a win, it was a message. Baylor played strong, smart, and with total confidence. They didn't just stop Gonzaga, they crushed their perfect season. Jared Butler and his teammates made history and proved that toughness and teamwork still mattered more than anything. Then came Kansas in 2022. They were a powerful team all season, but it was their comeback in the national title game against North Carolina that stood out.
Down by 15 points at halftime, Kansas stormed back and won it all.
It was the biggest comeback ever in a championship game.
Their win reminded everyone why March Madness is so exciting. Anything can happen.
In 2023, UConn returned to the top. They didn't just win the championship, they dominated. Their defense, shooting, and energy made them the best team in the tournament.
That same year, LSU's women's team also made big news. Led by Angel Reese, they beat Iowa in a fun and fiery championship game.
Their win wasn't just about basketball. It was about passion, confidence, and women's sports finally getting the attention they deserve. But while the games were exciting, big changes were happening off the court. College conferences began to undergo significant changes.
Teams began moving to new conferences not because of tradition, but because of money, especially football money. The Big Ten, which used to include only Midwest schools, added teams like UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington from the Pacific Coast. This turned the Big Ten into a coast-to-coast super conference.
Why did they do it? Because TV deals were worth billions of dollars. More games, more fans, more money. Other conferences followed. The ACC added schools from California and Texas, such as Stanford, California, and SMU. These moves didn't make much sense based on location, but they made a lot of money sense. Schools wanted to be in strong conferences to stay on TV and maintain their competitive programs. It wasn't just about football anymore. Basketball had to adjust too. Teams now had to travel across the country for regular games. Players had longer trips. Coaches had more demanding schedules, but they had more chances to play on national television. Another change was the end of independent teams. For a long time, a few schools didn't belong to any conference.
They made their schedules and hoped for big games, but that life got harder. Without a conference, teams couldn't get automatic bids to the NCAA tournament.
They have fewer chances to play in meaningful games. And in 2024, the last independent team, Chicago State, joined the Northeast Conference. That was the end of independent basketball in Division I.
From now on, every team would need a conference to survive.
During this time, college basketball had to rebuild itself, its structure, its rules, its excitement. It had to keep pace with the rapid changes in sports media, fan habits, and conference politics.
But even with all these changes, the game stayed strong. The players still gave everything. The fans still believed in upsets and buzzer beaters. And March Madness kept reminding us why college basketball matters.
Byline Jew Metis and Mainibury Career College Wears, and this is a really state's great wall, by Largis and present day issues and legacy, 2024 to present. Since 2024, college basketball has been navigating a complex new terrain defined by fairness, technology, and identity. Teams transitioning from Division II or III, such as Tarleton State and Utah Tech, are now eligible to compete in conference tournaments and potentially earn NCAA bids, though they must wait for full NCAA postseason. Yet conferences like the Western Athletic Conference have taken an extra step, implementing a resume seeding system that awards tournament seeding not just for conference records, but for quality wins against strong opponents and overall season strength. This data-driven shift rewards tough play and ensures fairness, even for emerging programs striving to make their mark. But it's not only eligibility rules that are changing. The past few years have seen college basketball squeezed between two powerful currents: athletes gaining more power and the NCAA adjusting to stay relevant.
Since July 2021, players can profit from their name, image, and likeness, collecting sponsorships, brand deals, and partnerships.
This autumn, NIL deals hit the headlines. Our Duke freshman Cooper Flagg reportedly boasts a NIL valuation of $4.8 million thanks to special deals with New Balance and Gatorade, and can now consider staying in college longer rather than heading immediately to the NBA. These deals, however, also create tension. Star players at smaller programs sometimes make more money than teammates at bigger schools, which can disrupt team chemistry and recruiting. To add complexity, NCAA rule changes in April 2024 granted athletes immediate eligibility upon transferring, essentially removing the one-year sit-out rule. Together, free transfers and lucrative NIL deals give players power, but leave coaches scrambling to build cohesive rosters. As one coach put it, today's system requires adaptability. One season's lineup is never guaranteed to be together in the next. The NCAA remains under pressure from legal and legislative forces. The landmark House v.
NCAA settlement paves a way for players to receive direct revenue shares from broadcast deals, potentially $20 million per school annually.
However, NCAA President Charlie Baker warns of Title IX tax and compliance complexities.
In this area, college basketball is evolving faster than ever before. The game's identity is being redefined around a multidimensional athlete, part student, part brand, part employee.
The observant coaches act as talent managers, navigating NIL markets and ensuring academic progress. Conferences offer intelligent seeding systems such as the wax resume model.
Programs strike a balance between tradition and adaptability, fostering team chemistry amid frequent roster changes and talent-driven shifts.
At the same time, competitive integrity and financial fairness are under scrutiny. Will powerhouse programs with massive media contracts further distance themselves from mid-majors?
Will smaller schools struggle to break through in inflated tournaments? Will players have sufficient support and oversight? Or will NIL-driven deals divert attention from education and team identity?
College basketball's future depends on balancing these pressures: athlete empowerment, institutional fairness, and the essence of the college game. The court may look the same, but the game behind it has changed. Amateurism layered with professionalism, loyalty balanced by opportunity, and tradition infused with tech-driven adaptability.
Are these changes good for the sport you love, or do they signal a loss of what once made college basketball special?
Let us know your thoughts and subscribe so we can bring you more in-depth stories about the teams, the players, and the shifting landscape of college hoops.